Hello and welcome. Today we will revisit the Tunisian Crossed Stitch. If this is your first time, thank you very much for stopping by. My name is Mirka and I make stitch and pattern, crochet and Tunisian crochet tutorials. So if this is of your interest, please consider subscribing. And without further ado, let's dive into today's tutorial. There are two ways how you can crochet the Tunisian cross stitch. You can have the crosses either aligned between rows, like on this small swatch here, or you can have them alternating between rows. So we'll look at both methods today. So we will first start with the easier one, where we have the cross stitches aligned between rows. So as per usual, we start the tutorial with a slip knot and with chains. For this pattern, for the first type, we will need an even number of stitches, and this will be one row repeat. So the first way how to do the Tunisian cross stitch is a bit easier than the other way. So we first need to chain an even number of chains. So for this tutorial, I'm going to make a miniature swatch. I've got 8 stitches, so that's an even number. We then turn the chains upside down and we will work into the back bumps of these chains, yarn over and pull up a loop. So now we've got 2 loops which account for 2 stitches, and we will repeat the process for the rest of the chains. So we should end up with, in my case, 8 loops on the hook. So this is also known as the foundation row or the standard foundation row, and it's usually the same for your Tunisian stitches with some exceptions. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 chains. I will now work the return pass or standard return pass. So we will chain 1 and then yarn over and pull through 2, and we will repeat yarn over and pull through 2 for the rest of the row. So this is your foundation row, and now we will start row number 2, which will be our repeat row. So we will not count the loop that is already on the hook. It's the first stitch. We will then skip the next front vertical bar and we will work Tunisian simple stitch into the following stitch. So the Tunisian simple stitch is worked from right to left. We will go under that front vertical bar, yarn over, pull up a loop. And when we work Tunisian cross stitches, we try to leave the loops slightly looser than we would normally leave them. This is because we are going to be crossing stitches, so there will be some yarn shortening, and if you work them too tight, it will be quite hard to then go back and work into the other stitch, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. So we're going to go back into the skip stitch and work Tunisian simple stitch there. So go in there, in that front vertical bar, yarn over, pull up a loop, and as you can see, this caused a crossing over of the loop in the row below we are working. And we will repeat this stitch pattern for the rest of the row. So again, we will skip the next front vertical bar, work Tunisian simple stitch into the next one, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then work Tunisian simple into the skip stitch, like so. So for me, I've got the last pair of stitches, so I will work Tunisian cross stitch there, and then we have the last stitch, which is also called the end stitch or the edge stitch, depending on who wrote the pattern. The terminology might be slightly different, and we will work under both of the bars of the very last stitch. So we go under both of these, yarn over, pull up a loop, we need to double check that we still have 8 loops, so we haven't lost any stitches, and we will work the standard return pass of chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, so this is the first method of how to work your Tunisian cross stitches. Again, I'm going to work one more row slightly faster so you can see the technique. So you'll be always skipping the first stitch of the pair, work Tunisian simple stitch into the next one, and then go back into the skip stitch and work the Tunisian simple stitch there. So this is one row repeat, worked over an even number of stitches. Like so, and for all your rows, you will work the standard return pass of chain 1, yarn over, and pull through 2. Okay, once we mastered the Tunisian cross stitch where the crosses align between rows, we are ready to go on to the next method, which is alternating the crosses. For the second type of Tunisian cross stitch, we will also chain an even number of stitches. So I kept the foundation row from my previous sample, and this will be 2-row repeat this time around. So the first row of the stitch pattern, which is the second actual row, will be the same as for a line Tunisian cross stitch. So we will skip the first stitch, work Tunisian simple stitch into the second stitch, and then return back to the skipped stitch and do Tunisian simple stitch there. And we will repeat this for the rest of the row. Followed by an edge stitch or end stitch and standard return pass. Chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2. So where the difference is the second row of the stitch pattern, which is the actual third row. So there we will work 1 Tunisian simple stitch into the first stitch there, and by this we will offset the cross stitch pattern, and then we will work the usual cross stitch pattern, which is skip the first stitch, work Tunisian simple stitch into the next, and then return back to the skipped stitch and work Tunisian simple stitch there. So again, we will repeat the same process, and once we get to the last stitch there is only one, so we don't have any other stitch to cross this with, so we will work Tunisian simple stitch and edge stitch. Okay, and standard return pass. So introducing the Tunisian simple stitch, the 1 Tunisian simple stitch at the beginning of the row offsets the stitch pattern by 1, and this causes the Tunisian cross stitches in the second stitch pattern row to be alternated in comparison to the first stitch pattern row. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to repeat the rows 2 and 3 once more for you to see how the stitch pattern is developing. So this row I'm working the usual stitch pattern of starting and pairing up the stitches together, starting the stitch pattern right from the beginning of the row, and standard return pass. And now we will repeat the row number 3, which is Tunisian simple stitch in the first, then Tunisian cross stitch until we get to the last stitch that is not paired with any other stitch. We will work Tunisian simple stitch there and edge stitch, standard return pass. And you will repeat the rows number 2 and 3 for the desired length of your project. And as you can see, the stitch pattern has started to develop and the cross stitches look as if they were leaning left. So thank you very much for watching. I hope, as usual, I hope that you found this tutorial useful. Let me know in the comments below, have you tried the cross stitches before? Did you know how to work both of these ways to work these cross stitches? And most importantly, what would you use it for? What kind of project would you use these stitches for? And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. Bye bye.